They're calling it, oops, I just got a recording in progress note. So they're doing a lot of research now into epigenetics, which is, I talk about it in Legacy, the first book that I wrote about trauma back in 2019. And it's basically the idea that your DNA doesn't always stay the same. But what that means is, of course, as far as Western science understands it, that we're born with a set of genes. But what happens is that some of those genes switch on and switch off, depending on our life experiences, right? So the science of epigenetics, as they're studying it now in the Western sort of traditions, would say that yes, certain genes can be turned on if we have experiences of childhood trauma. Then there may be a gene turned on that means that we're going to secrete, for example, more cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Or there may be a gene turned on for any number of things that happen physiologically in the body, right? So you might have kidney problems because toxic stress. That means you're living in a lot of fear, and it could impact your kidney. And if there's something in your genetic code that says that you're more or less likely to develop a problem with kidneys, that stress is going to turn that gene on and perhaps create a problem with your kidneys, right? So yeah, there is Western science called epigenetics that absolutely says that this is one of the mechanisms where trauma becomes intergenerational. And I'm sure some of you have also heard of the term blood memory. That is how I've tended over the last 30 years or so, how we tend to discuss inheritance, or it's one type of inheritance anyway, in our families and in our communities, right? Where, and he just passed like a week or so ago, the writer and artist, N. Scott Momaday. He was Kiowa. Down below the medicine line. He was from, I forget what state, but he was from the States. And he had a memoir out some years ago, and in it, he said something about, my mother's memories are now my own. That is the burden of the blood, right? Because it's what we talked about last time. There was a couple of us that shared this experience when I shared as well, that there's kind of two types of trauma stories. Some people don't talk about it at all, and then the kids grow up wondering, like, why are we so unhappy in this house? Or why is dad self-medicating? Or why is mom so sad all the time? And they don't know because there's no stories about what has happened in the family, right? But then there's folks like my mother, and there was at least one other person who shared last time that it was the same in their family with their mom, which is like they're talking about their stories of victimhood all the time because they're trying to make sense of it, and they're trying to process it, and they're trying to move all those unresolved emotions. But what happens, of course, is that kids get stuck in that narrative, but it's someone else's narrative, and then they can't develop their own personality and their own sense of being in the world and their own even set of goals or whatever, right? So we talked about that last week, and that is how I sort of make sense of blood memory for like 50% of it. And then there's the inherited stuff that is like ancestral and ceremonial, and I do not at all claim to understand that. I just know that it exists, that, sometimes a baby can be born and everybody will stand around and look at that kid and go, that kid's amazing. And also they remind me of, Masoom so-and-so who passed like 10 years ago, right? And it's that unexplainable, to me anyway, at this point in my knowledge, stuff that happens that we carry our ancestors, they're with us. And that to me is a good thing, of course it's a good thing. They're our guidance, they're, our protection, they're everything. And it means that we inherit all the good and the strength and the awesomeness. But yes, I think sometimes, as N. Scott Momaday said, and as I've experienced and so many others have experienced, there can be times when we inherit, a burden of trauma as well, whether it's through stories or just that ancestral energetic inheritance, right? So yes, absolutely, trauma can happen in the womb. There is scholarship as well on how women who are pregnant or who conceive during or even give birth, I suppose, too. I think the research shows that when they're in a very stressful time, such as war, or they're fleeing, something, they might be in a refugee situation. Where the health of the child can be impacted through the experiences of the mother, right? There's plenty of scholarship on that. So thanks for asking about that. It can happen. And I think that complicates our work as helpers or community members, as people who are trying to figure out our own family stuff as well, and be of service to our families. But I also think that, here's the thing to remember is that if trauma happens in the womb, so does all that strength that gets passed down. It's both, right? We have the resiliencies and we also have the negative experiences as well. So there's lots of resiliencies passed down as well. And I see you all introducing yourself in the chat. Thank you so much. We got lots of folks from around Alberta, and I don't know if I've seen anybody from outside Alberta yet, but I know last week we did have a few folks. So next question, tips on not becoming burnt out. That will be next week. We are doing a whole, is it an hour? Whatever it is next week on self-care, avoiding, what is compassion fatigue, and avoiding burnout, so that, we make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so that we don't get to burnout, right? Because burnout is the end stage of where we want to be. So that's next week. Thanks for asking. Trauma and healing activities for youth, that will be today. We'll move into that in a minute or two. Another question, is widespread trauma a sign of our times? Unfortunately, yes. I think that trauma is pervasive. And it's not just me. I mean, who am I? There's tons of scholarship around this, books being written. And I think what it is that folks do not have, as we used to have, the family and community supports that we used to have to heal from, life experiences, because life is hard sometimes and bad things happen. And that has been throughout all of human history. I think the difference today is that we don't have, cross-generational knowledge transfer for Indigenous peoples in that context has been interrupted. So we don't necessarily, depending on who we are, where we're from, and the experiences of our peoples, families, and nations, have knowledge keepers, or not as many as we need for all the need, I think definitely colonization, because it's ongoing, as we talked about last week, means it just keeps piling up generation after generation. And when I look at all of the migrant crisis in Europe and in South America, and when I look at the wars that are being fought now and how many children are being targeted, like, I don't know where the Geneva Convention went. Apparently it doesn't exist. Kids are just being murdered in war now. Great. Yeah, I think trauma is widespread. And I think this is going to be something that the world, literally the world, all of our societies are going to have to come to terms with. How do we just be better for our children, right? And that's why y'all are here. So you all are stars. And there was a question that was also asked, where is it? I can't find it, but I remember it. It was something about, so what's the plan with healing from trauma, like trauma services? And I thought, I wish there were a plan, because too often it's survivors like Indigenous communities now, folks like us who are coming to these sorts of things and all the things that are happening in our communities, you know, urban, rural, and on reserve, that, you know, we're doing the work of healing when really it should be the dominant society. And that's what I said in Legacy too. You know, the dominant society should be setting up healing centers. They should be funding training for young people who want to learn about plant medicine. They should be funding, you know, elders colleges and all of this stuff. Do they want to? Of course not, because they want to stay in control. So there you go. I don't think there is plan for the person who asked that, but I think by doing this work, we're kind of creating a movement, and maybe we can get to a plan someday, right? And I see all of your intros, so thank you again, everyone. Before, you know, we're almost at the halfway point, so I don't want to take up too much time. Some of this, protecting trauma survivors in systems, we'll get to that next week for sure. And there was another one that I also wanted to say what happened next week. Yes, new approaches to trauma-informed policies and integrating a trauma-informed approach into design processes. Fantastic questions. We're going to talk about that next week. So I think ADHD, trauma, mental diagnoses, that's a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today. The importance of mindfulness, what happens when we dissociate to survive during traumatic experiences, what happens when we develop coping skills that lead to a mental diagnosis, but indeed, the mental diagnosis is not something that we're going to carry forever. It's just how our minds and spirits and emotional capacities and bodies are dealing with, right? We'll start talking about that today, but we'll definitely continue weeks 3 and 4. Having confidence, how to have more confidence working with students with trauma. I'm going to talk about developmental trauma on another day, either next week or perhaps the week after. I'll see how I can design that. But we can start today by giving you these activities and exercises. And through that, I think that will start building confidence. And we have a bunch more questions, but let's get to the activities and exercises first. And then if I have more time, we'll go back. If not, I'll get to the questions I wasn't able to answer next week. Okay. And still people rolling in. Hello and thank you. So no slides today because we have a shorter time. I didn't want to be in slide land with you today. What I thought I'd do is share some activities and exercises that I've used working with clients in Indigenous-led organizations when I was working in Toronto as an agency worker. Also, these are things that I've used when I was working in non-Indigenous places where we had a lot of Indigenous clientele. And yeah, I also did a lot of these activities and exercises with students as well, and of all ages. I'm certified as a classroom teacher to teach grades 4 to 10, but I worked in a lot of elementary schools, and the principals would always just say, can you go work with these classrooms this year? And they'd have their own ideas. And a lot of times I was working with the grade 1, 2s, and 3s as well. So when I was a museum educator, I worked with high school students a lot. So I've used these things K to 12. So they work for everyone. They also work for adult clients. And I thought we'd start with this one because we can all do it together and get ourselves into this space as well. So this one, I've just called it resetting the nervous system. It's really easy. If you're standing, if you're doing something, just stop whatever you're doing just for 30 seconds, if you can. And if you're sitting in a chair, just put your feet flat on the ground, if you can, depending on your ability. And just do one little shake of your shoulders and just make sure you're a little bit not as tense as we usually are when we're at a computer or, doing all this stuff. And to reset our nervous system, Move your eyes to the right, not your head, but just your eyes. Put your eyes and look to the right. Keep your head looking straight ahead. Then move your eyes to the left, all the way back over to the left. Again, don't move your head. And then move your eye back to the center. Okay, it worked for me. I don't know if it worked for you. Sometimes it takes 2 times. You should feel an urge to take a very deep breath. If you yawned, that's fantastic. I almost never yawn, but a lot of people do. It's a good way to reset. Any time of the day, you can be on public transit in a city, you can be in a meeting at work, you can be working with a kid at the back of the classroom. If someone is in distress and you can't reach them with words and you're trying to like reach them and connect and say, listen, buddy, we gotta, what's going on here? Da da da. Just say, hey, buddy, can you do something? Or hey, lady, miss, can you do something for me? And there's another exercise we can also use. This doesn't work for everyone who's in distress necessarily, but it can. And what it does is it just, well, I don't know. I actually don't know how this works. But if you had any response, do let us know in the chat. But all it is wherever you are, move your eyes to the right, hold for a bit. Move your eyes to the left, hold for a bit. Move it back to the center. And it works every time that I take a huge deep breath. And it's just, and now that I've done it twice, I'm like looking around like, hey, how are y'all? I feel like a new human being myself. But I've been doing this exercise for a couple of years now. So, I think sometimes you can get into an exercise. That often happens with yoga meditations and stuff too, where you try it the first time and you're like, okay. But the more you do it, it's like a bit of a training, right? And I love the funniness. And Felicia has said it resets your vagus nerve. Yeah, I think that is what it's doing. It's the main nerve that we have going from the gut to the brain. And the vagus nerve is actually like our third nervous system, because we often hear about the fight or flight and then the rest and digest. And then there's that third nervous system, which is like your vagus nerve that joins both brain and gut, right? I love Leah has said here, and this is funny, looking at your organized bookshelf is very calming too. That's funny, thank you. And I promise I'm not lying. This is really my bookshelf, but also you don't see the bottom shelf. That's my kind of messy part. So that is actually something that I do. And sometimes when we're having a 10-minute break in a long meeting or something, just turn away, just to the right, to the left, to the center, deep breath, and whew. And I feel so much more relaxed now. And just, and ooh, a little tingly up on the back of my head. So practice that. I will be putting it out, and as I say, at the end of the 4 sessions, I'll send that to Manisha, so you'll have a copy of this. There's something else though, that if someone is in distress, and maybe this has been around for a few years now, so some of you might have heard from this. There's also another exercise. If that exercise doesn't work, or they're not, if you're speaking with someone and they're not really able to mirror what you're doing or saying to them, sometimes this exercise works better. This is the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise. And probably some of you have already used it or know of it. For those of you who don't, this is just an awareness exercise, right? And it's about connecting with the world around us. It's about connecting, for sure. This is how it works for people in distress, when you're just like flying out of everywhere. And I've been there personally, during times when you know, my younger days when I wasn't able to stay calm and centered, right? When you're like the top of your head's flipped out and you're just blah somewhere. You're not connected and you're not able to respond. This is when you're reacting to everything. You're either triggered or you're reacting emotionally, anger or fear. Those 4 F's as we talked about: fear, flight, fight, or fawn, you know, the people pleaser response. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is about balance and connection. It does definitely work with people in distress. I had one student, she was 12, can't remember now, was she grade 5 or grade 6? I think she was grade 5. And she used to get really triggered sometimes in the classroom. And no one could figure out how or why. Like I was like, we were just working independently. Like we weren't even talking. And she'd flip out. And that's not a judgment, you know, like she just flipped out. No judgment on that, but that's where she was. And she would leave the classroom and sit in the hallway and just like she was just done trying to be with other people. So I use this one with that student. So pay attention to your breathing. This can be a follow-up to the reset your nervous system, because when you're in that, oh, I'm kind of tingly and centered now, better. Take a couple of slow, deep belly breaths. That often helps folks, whether it's us in a work day or someone who's in distress, just feel where their body's at. You know, I had an acupuncture treatment on Saturday and I'm feeling like a whole bunch of like tightness around certain areas. And when I take that deep breath, I can feel that, but it's good. That's what we were working on. So, okay. So take those deep breaths, just feel where your physical body is. And then we go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 down the exercise. And I know some of you know this. Please feel free to, you know, put in how you've used this and the different things that you do. First thing we do is we either ourselves or we would tell the client or the student, look for 5 things around you and say them out loud. Simple as that. Just look for 5 things. Can you look around right now? Sweetie, I'm terrible. I call students sweetie. I know I shouldn't, but I hug my students too, even though technically school board says we're not supposed to, always with door open, of course. But sweetie, look for 5 things around you, okay? Can you tell me 5 things that are around you right now? So those things could be, I see a pen. I see the sky. I see a spot on the ceiling. Whatever it is. And this is the thing, you can't do this exercise wrong. So it gives confidence to someone, because maybe that what they're in is that they're not feeling confident, or they're feeling fearful or whatever, right? Just look for 5 things. Okay, 5 things, not wrong. Great, you did that. You're awesome. And then the next step is to think of 4 things you can feel and say them out loud. So it could be anything. For me, I feel the cushy chair that I'm sitting on. I feel the edge of my shirt against my neck. I feel the floor under my feet, right? Whatever it is. Think of 4 things you can feel and say them out loud. Then the next step is to say, listen for 3 sounds. Again, could be anything. There's no wrong answer. Could be the sound of traffic. It could be the sound of rain or wind on the roof. It could be the sound of your stomach rumbling, you know? For me, I'm hearing my heater because I live in an uninsulated cabin in the forest. Oh, BC. Oh, the insulation in houses thing, it's really a thing. So I always hear that heater, you know? Say the 3 things out loud. Then you move down to say 2 things that you can smell. Now, not always can you smell something, right? So if you can't smell anything at the moment, name your 2 favorite smells, because then that brings yourself or the person you're working with to a safe and happy place, right? Name your 2 favorite smells. Now I can sort of smell, you know, the porridge I cooked for breakfast, you know, it's kind of still here in the house? You know, no wrong answers, right? Or your 2 favorite smells. And then you end with, say, one thing you can taste. Maybe it's toothpaste from brushing your teeth. Maybe it's the onions in the sandwich that you're eating or you ate for lunch, right? Maybe it's the gum you have in your mouth, whatever it is. If you can't taste anything, it would be the same as smell. Just say your favorite thing to taste. After you do those 5 things, working down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And again, you're going for looking, the 5 things, feeling 4 things, listening for 3 sounds, smelling 2 things or favorite smells, 1 thing, taste. Just take another deep belly breath, and then reflect. And if you're working with someone or, well, with yourself as well, reflect on the before and the after. How have you changed? And that's actually a really deep question, right? Because it's like, well, where was I before and why was I there? Or what made me be there if something just kind of happened to put me here? Now, what did I just do? Oh, and now why do I feel this way? Like, this is huge work with a client or a student and with ourselves as helpers or as parents or as family members or whatever, community members. So I use the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 exercise a lot. Now we're supposedly at time, but I'm going to continue with my last couple of exercises. I'm going to try to cough quietly too. Excuse me. For those of you who do have to rush off, we understand, and we'll see you next week. Hi, Vivian. And of course, I'll be handing this out at the end as well. So you'll have all of these. But for those of you who can stay, an extra 5, there's also another thing that comes from the 12-step addictions process. They've devised this exercise and then handed it out to the world and say, you can use this, right? And it's called the HALT exercise. And HALT is an acronym. So H stands for hungry, A is angry, L is lonely, and T is tired. So whenever you feel weird, whether it's you in your job, you in your family, your partnership life, whether you're working with a client or student, whether you're in a meeting and things are getting heated, if you're intervening in 2 people being in, you know, disconnection or, you know, at loggerheads, try the HALT exercise. Let's just check in here on the HALT. Can we just halt everything for a minute? I want to check in. And sometimes it's you, everybody, however you say it. Are you hungry? And they'll go, nah. Are you angry? Yes. Right. And they usually know right away. Are you lonely? And sometimes, especially with adult clients in an agency setting, sometimes the answer would be yeah, all the time. Are you tired? Especially with students. Yeah, I didn't go to bed until 2 last night. I was playing video games. Oy. Right? So the HALT exercise, hungry, angry, lonely, tired, is another mindfulness and connecting exercise, because it just halts whatever we're doing, whether we're, you know, in conflict with someone, whether we're feeling all about our work schedule, whatever it is. If 2 people are fighting, if the meeting's not going well, can we just halt? You check in, and I refer to this as sort of like remembering our sacred selves at birth, like a little baby in a crib, because you're never too old for a nap or a snack, okay? And you can be 7 years old, but you're never too old for a nap or a snack. We need to take care of ourselves. And in this fast-paced world, well, depending on where you live. I mean, where I live is not so fast-paced, you know. Very exciting when 2 cars in a row go past and like, whose car is that? But whatever state we're in, do the HALT exercise. It's often a good way of just kind of taking down like reactions to things and building us up to that place where we can again respond. Okay, so I think I'll end today with the idea of ritual, because Indigenous peoples, well, many peoples, no matter what your, culture is, or what your, if you use the term religion, or if you use the term spirituality. I know we just had Lunar New Year, the Chinese calendar, whatever, you practice as culture or, spirituality, we tend to think of like the fancy ceremonial stuff as ritual. And of course it is. But there's also little things we can do every day that are rituals that help us connect to something larger than ourselves, so that we don't feel so alone, so that we can bring ourselves down to a place where we can think about things and it's not like triggering or as difficult, right? And these smaller rituals just help us. They do so many things. They help us seek peace. They help us clear our mind or our spirit. They help us gain connection, whether that's to ancestors or loved ones, ourselves, the land, whatever. They connect us to family and culture and traditions and society as well. Sometimes rituals let us let go of things, help us let go of things. And this is something that I used to worry about, is like, oh, I didn't do that today, or I didn't do that this week. Man, I'm only 55, and I know if you're in your 70s, then that seems young. But when I think of me being 55, I look back at myself in my 20s and I go, oh my gosh, how did I get this old? If I've learned anything by now, it's that rituals don't need to happen on a schedule, at least not for me. They don't. They can be daily, they can be weekly, they can just happen when they can happen, right? They can be big, they can be small, right? So here's a few ideas on ritual. We'll end with this, and please feel free to have any questions in the oh, and we've got a question here. Can you type that down? Yes, all of what we're doing today, I'm definitely going to give to Manisha so that she can hand out at the end of the 4 sessions. And any, to anyone who's attended, right? She has everybody's emails. So here's some ideas, and thank you for the question. So here's some ideas of rituals that don't have to be like big things, even though they are big things. We can light a candle at a certain time of the day or the week for a person who has died, or someone that we've lost. Doesn't necessarily mean that they're in the spirit world, but someone who's no longer in our lives, right? Just that one little action, doing that in the morning before you have your breakfast, or doing that at night while you do whatever, light a candle at a certain time of day, week, whenever it is. Nowadays, I'm a person who still listens to CDs. Sorry, I don't know how you do this with the streamers, but I know you can create your own playlist. So create a calming music mix. Listen to it right before you go to sleep. That really helps us come down to a place where we can get to sleep, right? And it's something that's there for us. Instead of like lying in bed with our eyes like this, like, why can't I sleep? Create that calming music mix. We can write down bad memories, then we can bury the paper. And bury it somewhere that it's not gonna like come up at you again. We can throw it in a fire. We have wood stoves here for heat where I live. Throw it in the fire, right? Or if you're going to some sort of, ceremony, throw it in the ceremonial fire, right? You can carry something special in your pocket to remind you of something or someone, and you can take it out and you can hold it when you feel angry or sad or afraid. You can create a work of art with the title, "This is Me," and put it up on the wall. And that might seem like a kid exercise, but no, I've done that with adult clients. I'm doing that with myself. I'm taking art lessons right now. And, my art, it's not all about me, but it's about family stories too. So that's all ages. We don't have to have like a major feast all the time, although feasts are fun. We can sometimes just prepare and eat a special meal in honor of a person or an ancestor. And we can do this even if we don't know who our ancestors are, right? That was a big thing for me, not knowing a lot of my mother's history and having that not documented in my family around who her father was. I often felt like, well, I don't even know who I'm connecting with. Yeah, you do. I might not know their names, but I know that they're with me. They made me. So prepare and eat just a special meal and just say like hi, or thank you in your language if you know it. And just do that and say, I'm sharing this meal with you, right? You can just sit quietly as well. That always works. Watch the sunrise or the sunset, depending on whether you're a morning or an afternoon person. You can go somewhere alone. You can yell, scream, and cry as much as you need to. That's great. I know that we have different cultural norms around how much of that energy to let out or what is considered appropriate. But I think sometimes, and I would say this is a thing with children and women especially, where if we show our anger, we're pathologized for that, whereas we expect men to be angry. And it's kind of the opposite with men. Men are told not to cry, but it's okay if kids and women do. So I think even though we have cultural norms about what's appropriate in terms of, energy that you're putting out and be careful of that, I think we're often told to shut down what we're feeling, either that sadness or that grief or that anger. And it's been one of the good things about being in menopause is stop caring what people think about you. So I've been doing this a lot the last couple of years where it's just like, when something annoys me, I actually express that. Whoa, has it ever created a feeling of freedom? Like I'm not stuck in that energy anymore because I've let it out, right? That is actually a ritual. You can keep a special pillow that you can hit, punch, throw when you feel angry. And, again, like some people would say, oh, that's not for me. If it's not for you, that's fine. You can do anything else on the list and create your own, right? But if you're able to see that thing as just the pillow, not necessarily, we don't want to go and pretend that it's like a person or something, but just this is the pillow that I just get that feeling out of my body with. Just, oh, I throw it across the room. If that's something you feel like you can do, that you want to do it. Because that's the place instead of putting that energy to the next person you speak to, right? You can do all sorts of stuff around, yoga poses. There's a lot online. There's some books that I've used. There's one you can lie on your back on the floor, put your arms up straight. So not out like this, but up like next to your head. And then just stretch out and relax your lower back so that you're flat against the floor. Wiggle your toes, wiggle your hands, flat out on the floor on your back. And that totally brings you to a new space. And that is a ritual. Of course it is, because we're connecting mind, body, spirit, and emotion in that moment. That is absolutely a ritual. Oh, and we have a question. Yes. What about meditation? Thank you. If you know some meditation exercises, you can do it while you're doing that stretching exercise. Absolutely. I'll put this in this list when we distribute this to everyone. There's a book I use a lot, Meditation as Medicine. Fantastic book. Yeah. So if you have some meditation things or you want to learn about it, meditation is great. And that's what Michael Yellowbird, if you had a chance to look at that video, the link that was sent out with I think it was the second invitation, and that was on me. I forgot to send it to Manisha for the first invitation. I'm sorry. If you had a chance to look at Michael Yellowbird's video, he talks a lot about all of this stuff, mindfulness, meditation. This is our tradition. We have been doing this for millennia as Indigenous peoples. This is what we do in the Sweat Lodge. This is what we do when we sing. It's all about brain waves, what Western medicine would say, right? It's all about connection, self-awareness, balance, connectivity, interrelationships, both within ourselves and with the other people that we may at that time be sharing those rituals with, right? And if you didn't get a chance to go and see that video, I can put it in the chat when we end. So another just couple of other ideas, can I remember now? Oh, baths. Baths are really helpful for some people. They don't work for all. I'm not much of a bath person, but I know some people where baths have been life-changing. Like new moms especially, like I get me time in the bathtub. Yeah, you do, right? You can use wild rose petals, you can use cedar leaves, you can even do some meditation, but you can also tell yourself things like, I am free to feel right now. I am a sacred part of creation. You can do all sorts of affirming things, or you can say nothing and just be in the bath. And Manisha said, baths work for me. There you go. Yeah. So again, not everything here that I'm, sharing with you is for everyone, but take what you can. And Manisa says she says, I am a spirit. Yes, I would say I am a sacred spirit. Yeah, I'm not gonna. My Korea is so bad. Nianiskos. I probably mispronounced that, but. And so a last thing that I can share today, and I know I've gone over time, for those of you who have stayed, thanks for your patience. We're doing Indigitime today, I guess. If you feel upset, or if you're working with a client, when they feel upset, tell them, draw a picture that represents that emotion. And that can be a big black squiggle. That's where they're at. I've had people do that. But sometimes they draw like a house and like stick figures of people, like they know exactly what story they're in. They're not just in that emotion, but draw a picture that represents the emotion or the feeling that you're in. Let the paper have it so that you don't have to carry it anymore. And then you can do the same thing with that paper as you did with, writing down a memory, right? You can bury it, you can burn it. Sometimes you can even keep it and then keep looking at that picture and trying to make sense of it as the days or the weeks go on and you're doing work with that client or your own self-care routine, right? So there's lots of things we can do that are ritual that don't necessarily need to be, bring us into a lot of like ceremony, although I would always say ceremony is healthy and good as well. We need to sort of, in a way, I think, release ourselves from that kind of idea that it always has to be the big feast or the big summer solstice celebration or that we're engaging in ritual every day, no matter what we do, because our ancestors are with us and the energy that we carry, both the resiliencies and the trauma are with us. And so these little things are good for self-care. They're good for us to use and model to our clients and our students, and they're good for folks that we work with as well. So sorry I went over time, I'll end there. And what I'll do, just as I promised that I would do the Michael Yellowbird URL for anybody who didn't see it. I think it's under colonization, right? Yes. Okay, so I'm going to put a URL just in the chat here, and it is the first video on this page. If you didn't see this URL in the invitation, here it is here. Check it out. I was really lucky to spend a couple of hours with Michael Yellowbird at OISE, the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, some years ago, probably mid-10s, maybe late 10s, when I was still living in Toronto. And and Roxanne's saying, I watched it twice. Oh, yay! I'm glad people are into it. As I say, and I promise now I really will end with this, is that he's pointing out that we know all of this stuff, right? This is our tradition, this kind of connected
why is she gone?
And interrelationship, right?
Oh.
I'll stop talking. And that's it for today, unless Manisha wants to end with something else. And Manisha has a question for Roxanne. What did you like in the video? What stood out? Oh, Brianna is saying, awesome to hear you mention Dr. Michael Yellowbird. I was able to listen to him this past week at a conference in Edmonton. I didn't even hear about that. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. When I spent, I think it was a 2-hour session at Oise, it was really great. Yeah. So,
I
Manisha,
guess what I like about that Dr. Yellowbird, well, first of all, he's very knowledgeable and smart, but I want to learn to decolonize my mind. But the issue is, how do you decolonize your mind when you work for the government? Because there's still policy and regulations to follow. And so, as an Indigenous social worker, even, how do you, like, it's not easy to just implement these teachings or these ways of knowing. Like, it's always, you need permission still. And yeah, that bugs me. It bothers me.
yeah. Oh, I hear you. Thank you, Roxanne. Yeah. Thank you for that. I mean, number one, I am sorry that you have to deal with that kind of stress in your work. I wish that the true intent of the treaties, where they have been signed, because of course half of Canada is not even under treaty, and I know there's different situations in the States as well. I wish that true intent had been honored. I wish that we were able to work together in relationship. I'm thinking of the two Rowan here that the Dutch signed with Haudenosaunee, early 1600s, right? Where, two rivers, and we're in our own river and we can do our own thing, but we are on the river together, and we don't interfere, but we're also on the river together. We are together working toward getting to the same place, right? Going down that river, our rivers, plural, together. I wish that you didn't have to deal with that stress. I wish that our systems and institutions were healthy places for us to do the work that we all need to do, for everybody, not just Indigenous people. But so I'm sorry to hear that. And I myself have worked in so many different systems, institutions, like organizations. And Roxanne's saying TRC still doesn't mean anything to most. Yeah, and that's the problem. Out of the 94 calls to action, didn't the Yellowhead Institute stop doing their yearly tracking because just nothing's happening? I think 2 or 3 have seen a little bit of change. Yeah, people think if we do land acknowledgements, like colonization is over now, right? I think, I don't know that I have an answer for you, Roxanne, but I can say in the work that I do, that these things, the things that we're talking about last week, this week, the next couple of weeks, help me remember that when someone says something stupid and stressful, from an admin office, they have no idea what my job is, or, stupid policy implementation, I can use these things to calm myself so that I don't have to be harming myself with this stress. And then I can also just center myself using these things to do the work that I can do for clients, or, whatever term you use for the folks that you're working with, through that system or institution, so that at least I can do what I can do. And I don't want that to sound like a wishy-washy answer, and probably all of you have already figured that out and are doing it yourself anyway, right? So I don't know that we have an answer to that yet, but I thank you for raising that question, because I think this is the work, right? This is the work that we have to do. How do we decolonize our own minds so we don't carry the stuff, the policies, the procedures, the stuff that they're telling us? They don't see the good we're doing sometimes in institutions, but they're always on us about, well, you didn't follow this to the letter of the policy. Oh my Lord, right? So I think this is the work, is that we just have to keep ourselves healthy as we can, keep doing what we can, and continue to do that work. I think we're in it. And I think that us being here and gathering together is part of the work, and that is how we create change. And that reminds me of one of the questions, which is is there a community of practice? I want to start a community of practice, where we're doing it now. So we'll talk more about that next time when we talk about self-care. But let's all maybe when we leave today, think about ourselves and also think about everybody on the session today, whether we saw their names or not, whether we know them or not, and just hold on to that energy that we've created today and send each other positive energy so that we can do that work of decolonization, both in our work and in our bodies, our hearts, minds, and bodies, right? So we've got a couple comments coming in. Yeah, Tiffany says correct. Yellowhead Institute has stopped. Yeah, that's what I thought. She says because it would take over 100 years to implement the TRC's call to action at this point. Yeah, especially with the rate they're going. Roxanne is saying our DNA is in the land, although the trauma still remains. Thank you for that. Yeah. And that's why I think Michael Yellowbird and those of us who do these sort of like activities and exercises, and I know you have your own things as well that you've used in your work. I think that's what we're trying to get at with building that connection and that self-awareness, right? Is that that's where we come from, that in the ancestral realm. We're here in the human world, the middle world, right? In between spirit world and land. We're here. And I think this is the work. We're in it, right? Brian says, I never seem to know whose traditional territory I'm in, and I don't want to offend. Whoops, and the chat's going fast. That's why I usually don't introduce myself, but when I know for a fact I do. Well, that's great, yeah. And then we can find out later, you know? So don't worry, like if, yeah, when I say please, you know, introduce yourselves, if and when you can. And when you learn and that's there, then you can add that in, you know, there's no judgment. I think we need to be really, what's the word I want? I think we need to hold space for each other because we're all at different places and we need to hold that space and we need to be kind and compassionate and empathetic for all of us in our work. Whatever it is that we do, and whether we're doing it personally for our family, our community, whether we're doing it professionally as helpers. Yeah. Someone said, you must have dealt with a lot of people to get where you wanted to be. Respect. I'm not sure who you're talking to there, but you know what? I'm going to say that relates to all of us on the call today in the session. Yes, thank you for that positive energy. That's exactly what we need to be building from each other. So, or for each other. So Annette's like, yep, have a great day, great strategies that we can use with those we share spaces with. Oh, thank you so much.